After almost being drowned during the MDR's Ortbo, Helena no longer wishes to continue working with the Innies at Lumen. However, the board basically forces her to continue working on the severed floor as her Innie self until Mark completes his work on the Cold Harbor file. So she does, which has to make you wonder about what the Cold Harbor file may actually be, that it would make someone come back to work even after almost being killed by a fellow coworker. But work on the Cold Harbor file doesn't begin right away, since Dylan demands to have a funeral for Irving's Innie. Because while he may not technically be dead, his permanent firing means he may never come to exist again. So Milchick agrees to the funeral, and the entire MDR group gets to mourn the loss of Irving while dining on a watermelon in the shape of his head. But it's during the actual ceremony where Dylan realizes that Irving's final words to him were a reference to a break room poster, so he goes to check it out and finds a card with directions to the exports hall on it. So we may finally learn what's going on with the exports hall, especially since we did get to see an actual glimpse of it in this episode. Although that glimpse didn't really provide us with any context whatsoever, since it featured a faceless man going on to do God knows what. At any rate, we see Mark acting like a dick for most of the episode, and his behavior causes Dylan to spitefully inform Helly about Mark's marriage to Miss Casey. This naturally causes Helly to grow concerned, but since Mark has been deceived by Helena throughout the entire season, he admits that he doesn't know if he can really trust Helly anymore. And that really sucks considering that Helly didn't even do anything. It's not her fault that she basically got her body and her entire identity hijacked, so she has to deal with the fact that her very existence may be weaponized against her, on top of the fact that her closest friend can no longer trust her, which means that some irreparable damage may have been done to this friendship, especially since Milchick admits that he knows about Mark having sex with Helena. And I don't know if that means that Milchick was spying on all of the Innies, which makes sense considering that that is what he spends most of his time doing, or if Helena always planned on having sex with Mark and had Milchick set up the entire retreat just to give them a place to do it. I mean, that makes about as much sense as anything else, right? I just can't figure out why Helena would want to have sex with Mark, because she seems to be pretty disgusted with the idea of Innies in general, so I can't imagine that she developed any genuine feelings towards Mark. So did she have sex with him because she wanted to experience the same kind of freedom that she perceives her Innie to have, or does it have anything to do with the Cold Harbor file itself? I don't know, but Milchick's work has been met with some criticism, as his higher-ups demand that he begins treating the Innies less like real people, and more like as what they really are. So it'll be interesting to see how Milchick will start to act from this point in the show, especially if he's going to be blackmailing the MDR team and turning them against each other. Meanwhile, Rickon begins work on the Lumen edition of the UUR, but much to Devin's dismay, the work is laden with company propaganda. And since the episode's title does come from Rickon's line of dialogue, it'll be interesting to see how the Lumen edition of his book will fit into the story. But the storyline that I definitely want to follow up with the most is the one involving Bert and Irving, since this episode finally provided us with an interaction between the two characters. Yes, for the first time since the season 1 finale, the series finally acknowledged how weird it must have been for Bert to have a random stranger pounding away at his door. So Bert admits that he has been following Irving ever since the overtime contingency because he believes that their Innies may have been romantically involved on the severed floor. So naturally, he invites Irving to have dinner with him and his husband Fields. That shouldn't be awkward at all. But hopefully that scene will be able to provide us with some answers about Lumen and about Severance in general. And hopefully we'll get to see even more of Irving, since it was weird watching the MDR group have to work without him. But before the episode comes to an end, Ragabi informs Mark that Lumen does have connections in the morgue and reveals that the cremated remains that he has are not of Gemma. This leads Mark to experience a sudden flash on the severed floor where he does see Gemma alive. And I assume this has something to do with the reintegration procedure that he had, which would also explain why Mark was behaving like a cold-hearted dick earlier in the episode. So instead of seeing how Mark would be if both of his personalities were instantly fused together, we're seeing how Mark's personalities would slowly begin to merge together. And I think that's pretty interesting. So while the episode may not have been as explosive as the last two episodes were, I was still able to enjoy it overall. And I'm definitely looking forward to seeing the next episode of Severance once it gets released on Friday.